Coming, hello. Today I want to stand in my former workplace and to say again that what happened to me was not okay.
Today, former political staffer Rochelle Miller said she wanted to tell her story. It involved someone much more powerful and famous, Alan Tudge, currently the Federal Minister for Education and Youth. Miller first disclosed a relationship with Tudge, her former boss, on Four Corners inside the Canberra Bubble report late last year.
Rochelle Miller says her affair with Alan Tudge, now acting Immigration Minister, was completely consensual.
But today she had a lot more to say, and the world has changed considerably since she first spoke out. This week, Australians were shocked by the anonymous stories of sexual assault, harassment and bullying in Parliament House. Today, Rochelle Miller put a face to those stories. And those stories were not just about assault, but about culture and power imbalances.
I'm fully aware that a year ago I said that my relationship with Minister Alan Tudge was a consensual relationship, but it's much more complicated than that. When I spoke out, not a single person from this government contacted me to see if I was okay. One female chief of staff sent me a text and that was it.
Miller said this was a story about Parliament House. And she spoke at exactly the same spot where Scott Morrison commented about the case of another political staffer, Brittany Higgins.
Jenny and I spoke last night and she said to me, you have to think about this as a father first. What would you want to happen if it were our girls? Jenny has a way of clarifying things.
Miller's intervention today, challenging the voters of Aston to consider the behaviour she alleges of Tudge, a man she claims physically kicked her out of bed because her phone had disturbed his sleep, is a suitable coda to a political year dominated by the issue of the treatment of women in politics. Mr Tudge, quote, completely and utterly rejected Miller's version of events today and said he deeply regretted the consensual affair. But despite the denials, Miller's statement still posed big problems for the Prime Minister. After all, earlier this week, he had described the Jenkins report's findings of what goes on in Parliament House as appalling and disturbing.
But given the seriousness of these claims that have been made by Ms Miller, it is important that these matters be resolved fairly and expeditiously. To this end, the Minister has agreed to my request to stand aside while these issues are addressed by my department, but I wish to stress that this action in no way seeks to draw a conclusion on these matters, Mr Speaker, but this is the appropriate action for me to take under the ministerial standards.
In a statement, Mr Tudge said he intended to submit written evidence to the inquiry that would contradict Ms Miller's position. The PM seemed to be very aware today that he needed to be seen to take these allegations very seriously. He announced that Vivienne Thom would be conducting the inquiry, the woman who ran the High Court inquiry into former Justice Dyson Heydon. Standing Minister Tudge aside only added to the sense the government is disintegrating around him, with a growing list of departures ahead of next year's election. Late yesterday, former Attorney-General Christian Porter announced, via Facebook, that he would not contest the next election.
Even though I have experienced perhaps more of the harshness of modern politics than most, there are no regrets. It's now time to give more of what is left to those around me, whose love has been unconditional.
Porter's departure has been reported very much in terms of the allegations and controversy he has faced this year. But the policy issues over which he presided are perhaps more important signposts to the history of this government and the policy controversies and approach to accountability in which it has often been embroiled. As Minister for Social Services, he played a key role in establishing the controversial robo-debt scheme, which saw hundreds of thousands of people facing devastating claims of overclaiming welfare benefits. Porter was occupying the office of Attorney-General when the government was later forced to concede that the scheme had no legal basis and was unlawful. The government eventually repaid $720 million of the falsely raised debts.
Are you able to tell us anything?
Also as Attorney-General, Porter would not rule out prosecuting journalists and sending them to jail for publishing public interest stories. He also made the decision to proceed with the prosecution of the man known as Witness K and his lawyer Bernard Collaery. Witness K was the whistleblower who revealed Australia had bugged a room in the offices of Timor-Leste's Prime Minister at the time the two countries were negotiating resource rights in the Timor Gap. Last year, Porter used his national security powers to have the court hearing of this case held in the strictest secrecy.
There is an urgent medical crisis in Australia's offshore detention centres,
In 2019, the government lost an historic vote when Labor and the crossbench forced through what was known as the so-called Medivac laws, designed to more easily allow seriously ill asylum seekers to be evacuated from Australia's offshore detention centres. During that process, Christian Porter resisted attempts to have advice on the legislation from the Solicitor-General tabled in the Parliament.
I've advised the Attorney-General that as Speaker, it's important I ensure in this instance all material available to me is also available to all members of the House.
After the 2019 election, Porter oversaw the repealing of those laws. The former Attorney-General also released the original proposal for religious freedom legislation, subsequently dumped. And his proposed model for a National Anti-Corruption Commission has been derided as a toothless tiger. Late this afternoon, Health Minister Greg Hunt told Parliament he will be leaving Parliament at the election.
On Sunday, they looked at me and said, "Dad, this is your last chance to be a proper dad. And it's time to come home, Dad."
That's a senior Cabinet Minister leaving, a former senior Cabinet Minister, once seen as a future PM, leaving, and another senior Cabinet Minister with his future under a cloud. There are also 7 other MPs leaving at a time when the government has gone from eyeing seats it can win from Labor to having to defend seats across the country. In the PM's home state of New South Wales, bitter divisions within the Liberal Party have seen pre-selections delayed for both House of Representatives and Senate seats. Incumbency is supposed to give governments a political advantage. As this ugly political year ends and we approach a federal election campaign, that advantage is far from clear.
Laura Tingle's with us from Canberra. Laura, as much as governments like to clear the decks at the end of a year, especially going into an election year, there is always unfinished business. What are the leftovers this year that are likely to be significant going into 2022?
Well, the leftovers are things that probably will never now see the light of day before the election, Lee. The big ones are the election promises for an anti-corruption commission, not going to see the light of day at the rate we're going. The government hasn't even tabled its proposed legislation on that and has balked at letting a debate go on about Helen Haynes' alternative model. The other one is the Religious Discrimination Bill, another election promise. It got about an hour's worth of debate this afternoon in the House of Representatives, but will be really struggling now to get debated if Parliament does indeed come back, and it's losing friends as we go. The Christian lobby today signalled that it was not all that keen on the way the debate was going. And finally, there was this very last-minute proposal about voter ID legislation, which offended a lot of people and outraged them. That's now been dumped very unceremoniously. And Labor insists there wasn't a deal on this, but one of the things that has come up as a bit of a surprise is a move that really puts incredible pressure on charities to declare themselves as political campaigners. And that's going to have a huge impact, particularly, I think, in the area of environmental charities.
As we know, trust has been an issue for the Prime Minister in recent times. How did that play into a matter that made headlines today regarding the awarding of a quarantine contract?
This is a story that's sort of come up a few times since September, Lee, including when the ABC's Andrew Green reported it. There's these contracts to set up a private quarantine hotel arrangement, and it was let to by a limited tender to 2 of Scott Morrison's closest friends, including a former Liberal Party director or deputy director called Scott Briggs. The Prime Minister was really outraged at the suggestion that he had somehow intervened in this policy or somehow involved in the letting of the contracts. But once again, because this issue of trust has become such a terrible one, and I think a separate question, there's been this focus right through the whole year about transparency and accountability in the awarding of grants. That this is the last thing the Prime Minister needs, particularly on an issue like quarantine, where things haven't really gone all that well for the government this year anyway.
Just to switch the focus to Labor, stakes are also high for Anthony Albanese going into an election year. What do you think are the issues Labor is going to need to get in order over the summer break?
I think they'll have to look at making sure that they've got a sound story on the economy. I think the government's now sort of vulnerable on that. They've obviously got their climate policy coming out over this next few days, and those are the two really big things that they're going to have to sort out. Other than that, they've got to just really look like, a bit like Kevin Rudd in 2007, they're sort of like the government only trustworthy.
Laura Tingle, thanks very much.
Thanks, Lee.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 7:30's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.